Namaskar. Haoajan Studio presents Imagination Unbound. And we are starting off with a new series of interviews, talks, and face to face with authors and poets. In short, we call it YAFY. Well, you all must be thinking what YAFY is. Then let me elaborate. YAFY is your author faces you. And we are starting off with our first poet, Gopal Lahiri sir. It's episode 1, Crossing the Shoreline. And let me introduce Gopal Lahiri sir with a short bio. Gopal Lahiri is a bilingual poet, critic, editor, writer and translator with 28 books published, including 9 solo and jointly edited books, and is anthologized worldwide. His poems are translated in 16 languages, and he has been nominated for Pushkar Prize for Poetry in 2021. And a number of accolades and awards are added to his credit. And here we begin with the interview. Sir, your first question, tell us something about Crossing the Shoreline.
Thanks, Rituparna. Actually, this book, Crossing the Shoreline, this is slightly different from my earlier books. These poems of this particular book is form poetry, which we call. Form means in a different way the poetry communicates. Here I have a few sections which expresses certain points and certain forms. Like the first section which I mentioned here is Voices of Conversation. That is basically short poems, but short is not very short. I kept it as less than 14 lines. The second one, which I mentioned here as a 14-liner, which normally people associated with this with sonnet, but some are sonnet, some are not sonnet. So even though the lines are 14 lines, so that's why I make a general title 14 liners. And the next section is haiku and senryu, which is popular Japanese form of three-line poems. And finally I delve into haiban, that is a prose with a haiku. This is a very specialized Japanese form, which I can't say I experiment, but which is quite different from other Japanese form, like haiku and senryu, which is very popular and which is basically three-liner. And you must be knowing that haiku we always characterize with 17 syllables. Now people call as a sounds, but that is classical haiku. Here what I have written is mostly the American and British people, which they call as a modern haiku. That doesn't constrain to 17 syllables. That actually because syllables are in Japanese parlance, it is different from the English way, how we pronounce. Like haiku, this is a 2-syllable English word, but in Japanese haiku means 3 syllables. So the whole structure is different. So that's why nowadays the modern haiku poets write in a much more compact fashion. So maybe around 13 syllables could be a good haiku, which maybe in Japanese it can sound up to 17 syllables. But here it is not like that in English. So I just follow the modern haiku pattern. So that is the later part. I will talk about that. First I must say that why short poems? Because in my earlier book, which is quite widely acclaimed, that title is Allays Are Filled with Future Alphabets. These title came because of pandemic. So those poems which were written in my earlier book, this has an indirect effect on pandemic. and that's why these alleys are filled with future alphabets. Mean there is a positive tuning to this particular line. So that I mentioned there in my earlier book. But here I have come up in a different way and expressed in a different forms that I have already mentioned. So this is in a gist the background of this book.
Thank you in advance, because we are looking forward to right now to hear one or a couple of poems from you, from your Crossing the Shoreline.
Well, I'll read this particular poem, which is very close to my heart. Title is More Real. Cleansing those old arguments, lights break out and burn, memories swirl, shifting and changing. Not everyone is a caregiver. Summer nights need the map of the deserts and cement the lineaments. The dawn wakes up to the lost villanelle. You are here, yet far beyond, real and more real.
That's really, really beautiful. Thank you, sir. Well, your poetry in essence normally deals with nature and its relation with human life. How would you place this book in that context? Is it a departure or is it a continuation of your previous theme?
Well, Ritu, it's not like that there is a departure as such. Yes, I love to write about nature and relation with the people. Because my background is I am basically an art scientist, so nature and art is always there at the background of my mindscape. So it will be there. But initially when I started writing, I used to really only think of nature and maybe the people surround it. But nowadays I have shifted quite a long way from that. Now, of course, the contemporary poetry, which is very much you feel, because now you must be knowing that people are writing more of a narrative poems, because people want to tell, want to connect, want to converse with the readers, rather than which Ben Jonson says long back that poets are maker. They make or craft a poetry. Of course, there are few poets who are still go by this idea that poetry craft, the poetry is very important, but the general trend is now people go for narrative poems, where they started almost stories like prose, they say in stories, in poetry, because they want to communicate with the readers like a conversing with one another. So that is one of the reasons modern poetry try to assert itself. In my case, as because you have raised this point, I try to keep a balance of that. Most of the poems in this book, it's generally it's a form poetry, so you have to go by this crafting, and the making of poem is important rather than you are telling a story. So in that way, it is a slightly different from which the contemporary poets are writing.
Well, my next question is, in your view, what are the trends in Indian English poetry? I mean, I want specifically your viewpoint, your take on that.
Current trends in English poetry written by Indians is quite different from say 20 years back, because now this social media has come, and also electronic media. These two are very powerful, and they are more powerful in this century, I mean in 21st century. So if you correlate or compare with the poets who are writing say last century, post-colonial, they have a totally different way of writing, because most of the journals are printed journals, hardly any online journals were there, and each poet has to depend on the editor. I mean, they have to send some poetry to the editor, then wait for months and months, or go to the editor's office and ask for what happens to my poetry and like that. But nowadays, this is a great relief that this online writing, creative writing especially, this vista has opened. I mean, now you don't have to wait for the editors to agree with your writing or not. Now you have a much more wider space to write, and you can send globally, not only to the Indian journals or magazines. You can write to all over the world, and your poetry can be judged by global editors and poets. So that's a very good opportunity, because poetry is basically opinionated form, because some poetry which I may like, you may not like.
Right.
So that's really an issue for poetry. Prose, of course, is quite different because it's more direct to the readers or to anybody, and they can easily understand what's happening in the prose. But poetry, as look at it, it has some inherent abstracts part is there, so it has to be like that. These things will happen. So I think for that matter, poets are now much more relieved, and as because this globalization, they have a much wider choice to write, and it has an effect on prose also, Indian poetry as well. So Indian poets are no longer confined to India only. They are quite widespread. You can check with any online journals or any social media where you can find so many poets, or especially the younger poets. They are writing, in prolific way. So that is whether all are good or bad. That is a different question altogether. But the flow is there, and there is a common idea that if you write and write well, then there will be a taker.
My next question is, how is it different or similar to contemporary world poetry? Your specific views on that?
Well, Ritu, it's a very good question. Yes, what are the difference, the way Indian poets are writing compared to world poetry? The most important thing which I believe, that Indian poets are now more rooted to Indianness. That I mean, they are more rooted to our country. Because if you look back, say 30-40 years back, Indian poets who write in English, they were more inclined to the how the English people speaking countries, those poets write. Their metaphors, similes, their way of writing. Indian poets try to follow that. You can have a lot of examples like Dom Morris, and of course Nissim Ezekiel is quite different from that. But there are poets who is to write as a model that outside global poets as their heroes or maybe favorite poets. But nowadays, what is very much gratifying, that Indian poets who are writing, as if they are rooted here, and English is almost nowadays an Indian language. So that's why you are calling it as Indian English. It's like any other language, because English, why it is still very popular, even though some people say it's a more of a colonial hangover, but it is not, because India is a different culture of the people and different language, more than around 28 language, major language. So the communication is mainly with English. Of course Hindi is there, but as a creative writing and as to communicate with the world, you need English. So Indian English is now, it's very, very important. That's why you can see a lot of even the government also recognize. You can see Sahitya Academy Awards also, poets writing in English. They also received, because earlier time it was not there. Maybe in the late 80s started giving even the award to the poets Indian poets who writes in English. So there is a wider acceptance within India about this English poetry written by Indian.
What I could make out from it is that previous Indian poets, they were like more like they followed they followed their writing in the line of that British legacy and all, and contemporary poets. Even as I can find from your books also, I've read a number of books of your poetry. They're more unique now. They have their kind of own identity now, so away from that shadow of the Brightons who used to write. That's very true. Well, in continuation to this question and the previous one also, my next question to you is your poetry rooted to Indian context or is it global? What do you personally feel about your poetry?
Right, Ritu, you have a very valid question. What I feel that about my poetry is that yes, the local will be global. I mean, any issues or any form which we accept, those are definitely global. But at the end of the day, the where we born and brought up, definitely those influence will come to your poems.
True.
You know that I am basically a bilingual poet, so I also write in Bengali. So Bengali, when I write in Bengali, it's obviously the locality, the local, I mean, problems or issues which comes to this local poetry. But in English, it's not that always I am going for those issues or maybe any relevance about that. It's more of a global in the sense that because we are writing, we don't have any boundaries at all. So anybody can write anything on any topic. So that definitely give an impact on your writings, and you feel that you are more at ease with the world itself. And finally, especially in context of this book, because we are discussing in the background that crossing the shoreline, the title itself is a very, I mean, important in the sense that as if when you stand up on the shore and see the boundaries between the land and the sea or lake or water bodies, you feel there is a clear demarcation. So, and the poet here strives for crossing that. In a way, if you think of inside, you can feel that any boundaries you want to cross. So that is a more of a metaphorical. But you know, this metaphor, similes, images, these are one of a few tools which earlier poets used quite randomly. But now, because of narrative poetry, these have this tendency are much more reduced. But in my poem, as because I have more tried to write on other than narrative poems, more of a craft poem like form poems which you have mentioned. These things, these metaphors, similes or images, these tools I use frequently so that it can give a different picture of what is your the content. So that's the way different poets are writing, and I have chosen that. So in that way, you can say that it is unique in the sense that it's not entirely Indian or not entirely global. There is a balance between that.
I repeat, as Indian writers, we have a unique worldview to offer. Do you agree on this? And if yes, please justify.
Well, Ritu, it's quite a difficult question in the sense that I cannot comment, especially whether Indian poets are as such. I write with a different view or different perspective compared to the world poets.
Okay.
My reader can definitely, they can, I mean, understand, they can explain this thing. But what I can say that the things which as a poet you believe, you write that. Nothing beyond that. So that's why poetry is very unique. No? It depends on the poets itself. Everybody has their own way of thinking and expression, and the other part is that readers are there, so they are on the other side, and they try to understand, they try to interpret what poets are writing. Especially if you go outside India, because this time we went to US and went to Washington DC for a program, literary program. There I was anchoring on a book launching. There we have seen some of the questions people are asking about poetry and about the myth, the cultural context they were asking. Even though they are, what you can say that non-resident Indian, and some of them are foreigner also, American also. How they think of our poetry, the Indian poetry. So that gives a fair idea about how they are thinking, how readers are seeing these Indian poets writing in English. So there is a very, very clear demarcation how they feel and how we feel. So it's not always very easy to say that okay, I am writing in a very unique way, because you never know what you are writing here. Maybe someone in some other parts of US or UK or in Italy or in Latin America, there may be poets who are writing very similar to this, because poets have a lot of interaction and connection, because nowadays internet is there and there is a lot of softwares are there of translation software. So even language is now not a barrier, which we earlier experienced. So in that way, there are a lot of similarities and dissimilarities. So I think this is a very, very important time which we are going through, and maybe in future you can say that the whole writing world is shifting to a new dimension.
Yeah, that's true. There has been a huge paradigm shift in the genre of poetry, in the world of poetry, as I could make from what you said. Tell us something about your upcoming projects.
Well, my recent projects are one book which I am planning for a long, long time. That is a compilation of my book reviews. So I have already completed my manuscript, and this has been given to a publisher. There actually, I have a lot of inclination to write book review, and I have already written more than 100 reviews in different papers, journal, magazine. And it's not a very hard criticism. It's more of a constructive criticism, or some says that your criticism is as good as an essays on different poets, highlighting the positive part. So in that way, it's all depends on how people perceive that. But yes, that is very close to my heart, and I have almost finished that project. And maybe this is the part 1, volume 1. And volume 2, again, I have selected around 40-45 reviews here in this book that I have titled Responsive Reviews. And the next volume may come after some time. And another book after this, Crossing the Shoreline, that has already been published. So I am now 29 of the book published. So that is titled Some Resonance, Some Desire. Some reviews are expecting very soon. That is very similar to this, but different context, more contemporary and not much strictly to the form. So there are memoir also in there, and haiku and all those short poems are there. It's some sort of a amalgamation of different free verses and form poetry. So that I have titled Some Resonance, Some Desire. So maybe a few book launches are also to be there about that particular book. And besides that, I have few other collection of poems which I have started writing the manuscript, and I haven't compiled any stories or any non-fiction as such. Maybe in future I may write something and may publish a book. In Bengali I have a few children's stories are there which I like to compile, because my collection of poems in Bengali, I think last year it came, the latest collection of poems. I have already 10 books in Bengali, and one of the important book is a translation that is from English to Bengali, that is short stories from Israel, that was translated from Hebrew to English by Haoajan, one academy, and then I have translated from English to Bengali. The title was, English title was not just Milk and Honey, and my Bangla was Kichu Muku, Kichu Du. So that has been published long back, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, published from National Book Trust, and it was very widely acclaimed. So many people are requesting me to do some translation work. Although after that book, I haven't translated much except few poems in reverse, I mean in Bengali to English and English to Bengali, like that. And before that I also written some, I have some translation of Dalit poems that was assigned by Sahitya Academy. There is a collection of Dalit poems. They had it, but that is also long back. Recent times translation is now in the back burner. I haven't done much, but more of this critiquing and more of poetry writing.
Now, sir, very important question. I'm sure you would like to, but still let me ask you, would you like to share your experience about working with Haoajan publishers? I mean, how you felt working with them, about their designing, book cover, overall production, quality of the book, the overall view. I'm sure you would like to share it, sir.
Well, Ritu, I have to say that it's a wonderful experience with Haoajan. Previously, I have many books from different publishers, but Haoajan is always special to me because of the way they approach the poets and authors. I can always talk about my experience. I have discussed beforehand with Haoajan publishers, Sharbojit and Mridula, how we will go about our book. And we have a series of discussion, and then we zero in, and then I submit my manuscript. And even though we work slowly, because there are certain things, because you have few illustrations are also there, but somebody says that why poetry needs illustration. There are questions many people have asked me, because poets and poetry, they are unique, they can explain, there is no need as such for illustration. But my argument is that illustration always enhance, and it's not that every page you are putting illustration. So in that way it is quite exceptional. This is the first time in my poetry book some illustrations are there, which is very commendably done by Sharbojit. He is a very good artist. And the other thing is the care, the affection, care, and the book is like a Bible. I mean, you just cannot do it as such as a profession. Okay, books come, manuscript comes, you do it mechanically and then submit and then complete and then finish up. It's not like that. And so that credit goes to the publisher. So I must thank Haoajan for this, for being with me, because I have many times disturbed them with changing my poetry, and there are a lot of last minute shuffling and changes. So they bear with me and they never become angry. So I am really grateful to them. But at the end of the day, everybody wants that the book should be good. And I cannot say, but I have whatever other people have told me, because this book has launched in many places, in Bombay, in Pondicherry, in Orissa, in this Chandrabhaga Poetry Festival, in now I'm going to Delhi for these two launching at India International Center. So it's widely publicized and people have read all over India and outside India as well. And a few reviews are coming outside India also, some journals. So in that way I'm very satisfied with my experience with Haoajan. So you can, I always take this book and I feel that is very close to my heart.
Thank you for your enlightening talk. It was really wonderful. But before we close this session, I request you to close this session officially with a couple of poems from your end.
Well, Rituparna, it's a pleasure to talk with you, and I'm already told you how happy I am for this particular book, and I'm very grateful to Haoajan also. Let me show the book. This is the book we are talking about. This is the cover of the book, Crossing the Shoreline, and I will read a couple of poems from this. The first poem, which is one of my favorite poem here, my poem. Every day the words shuffle their feet, they waltz around the books and shelves. Near the open door, the alphabets wait like a patient for the touch of my hands. The stanzas get stuck and sulks at times, but revert back right up to the alley, crisp and plain. Days spent digging for some elusive answer. A cool breeze washes over my face. The lights and shadows of some other universe weave lines and half lines. For the poem taking shape in this mothy room, I slide into the evening on the back of a dream.
Wow.
And the last one, which is incidentally the first poem in the book, Crossing the Shoreline. Darkness lingers in sleep. Dreamland disappears. Unmolested trees are still giving shade of love and light. Unknown alphabets draw humpbacked sand dunes, aligned in endless rows on the shore of my sleep. The mineral landscape draws each undulation of my own breathing. Every location is in walking distance. Go and receive the self. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have been enriched and embellished. It was really wonderful. And dear viewers and readers, poetry lovers, book lovers, fans and followers of Gopal Lahiri, sir, please log into our website www.haoajanscribes.com. Along with these books, other books are also available. Thank you so much.